Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'll be looking at the 2024 gubernatorial elections, and I'll be sharing my updated prediction with all of you. So it's been a couple months since I last did this, but of course, gubernatorial elections are interesting, they're pretty important, and 2024 has a pretty interesting map. We have, I would say, at least two, maybe three states that are going to have really close gubernatorial elections, and I'm going to take a look at all of them today. So just get started with our safe Democratic states. I right now only see one, and it's Delaware. So just to kind of give some context on this race, again, John Carney, the incumbent governor of Delaware, is term limited. So I believe the likely Democratic nominee is going to be Bethany Hall Long, and she's the current lieutenant governor. I don't know if Delaware does statewide lieutenant governor elections. I don't think they do. I think she just won because she was on the ticket with John Carney. But regardless, the Republicans don't really have any big candidates here, and Delaware is a blue state. So I would expect Democrats to hold on to this seat. But that's the only one I'm going to give them safe. Now, Republicans, they have a couple, Utah, North Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, and West Virginia, to me, all come to mind. I'm also going to put Vermont there. We'll talk about that a little more. But Vermont, obviously, Phil Scott has, I believe, not officially declared yet. It says he should have declared by now, so there's a chance he doesn't run, and if he doesn't run, I will move it likely into the Democratic column. But for now, I'm going to assume Phil Scott's going to run again. He's popular. In 2022, he won with 71% of the vote, so the seat is his if he runs. Just kind of go through these. West Virginia, Jim Justice is running for Senate, so that's also an open seat, but it doesn't really mean very much because, again, the Republicans are going to win this race. Moore Capito, who I think is actually the son of Senator Shelley Moore Capito, I think he's probably the more likely to win. Patrick Morrissey also ran for Senate against Joe Manchin and lost, but he would win if he was the governor or the gubernatorial nominee. And yeah, I mean, not a lot of, I would say, key Democratic candidates here. Steve Williams is the only one, and I only vaguely know who he is. So this one will stay Republican. And then in Indiana, I think that's another seat where the Republican incumbent's retiring. I think Eric Holcomb retired or was term limited. Yeah, I think he's term limited. So Mike Braun is going to be the Republican nominee here in all likelihood. He's the former U.S. Senator. He's going to be a former U.S. Senator, and he will defeat whoever the Democrats put up against him. And then Missouri, again, another open seat, but Democrats really just don't have a candidate here, similar to North Dakota. And then Utah, Spencer Cox is going to run for re-election, and he won by a lot last time. So, yeah, there's some complexities in these Republican races, but the takeaway should be that Republicans are going to win all of them. And the only one that I think could be remotely interesting is potentially Vermont if Phil Scott doesn't run. But I do think he's going to run for re-election. I think if he wasn't going to run, he would have said it by now. He would have cleared the field because no one else is running against him. But I think that in Vermont, I think the GOP there is probably pretty confident he's going to run again, and he will likely win again. So the rest of these states are to some degree competitive, but I think one of them stakes out as not really that competitive, and I'm just going to get it out of the way here. It's Montana. Montana in 2020 had a lot of hype for the Democrats here. Mike Cooney, who was the lieutenant governor of the state, was thought to have a good chance of beating Greg Gianforte, who is at the time seen as not that great of a candidate, but he's the governor now, and he won decisively in 2020. There are a few Democrats running, but they're not really they're not really, I think, well known enough to make this a race. I'm going to keep it in the likely column because in the one poll we do have, Gianforte is not super high. He's not like a super popular governor. He's fine. He's going to win, but I think he's going to underperform. And with Tester on the ballot, I think he's going to underperform Trump by just enough to make it kind of one of those more likely states. So next I'm going to do is Washington. Now, Washington, to me, is shaping up to be interesting because if we look at the polls, Dave Reichert, who's the Republican, is looking pretty good. So we haven't had the primary yet. It's going to take place this summer. It's in August, and that'll be a pretty good indicator because usually the Washington primary is generally reflective of the eventual election result. Like in the 2022 elections, the reason that I became so confident that Kim Schreier was going to win her House seat was because she did so well in the primary there, because it is a jungle primary, so you can kind of see how the turnout looks and how the Republicans are and how Republicans and Democrats are voting and how swing voters are voting. But it's likely going to be Bob Ferguson, who's the attorney general of the state, against Dave Reichert, who is, I think, one of the last. Let's see here, Dave Reichert. Yeah, he is one of the last like suburban swing seat Republicans, and he's a good candidate, and he's polling really well right now. So again, the top two candidates are bold because these are technically primary polls, but as you can see here, like he's doing well in primary polls, and then go to the general election polls. They have some of these. He's beating in the latest poll. He's beating Bob Ferguson. Now, a lot of voters are undecided, and I think that this race, a lot of people think it's going to be really competitive. I'm not in that camp yet because we just have so many undecided voters. But Dave Reichert's going to outrun Trump by a good amount, and I think that when it's all said and done, this could be like a 10-point race. But regardless, realistically, Bob Ferguson, I think, is going to be the next governor of Washington. Although I think likely just is a fair rating because there's a bit of uncertainty this far out. So these last two states, I think, are genuinely competitive. I think New Hampshire is the closest, so we'll touch on that last. So we'll start with North Carolina. And I'm going to put this in the lean column for Democrats. Now, this is an open seat, and North Carolina is a Republican tilting state, so it might be a little unusual to see an open seat in North Carolina being in the lean Democratic column. But recently, for starters, Democrats have done well in gubernatorial elections in North Carolina recently. Just if you kind of go over to how it's shaped up the past few years. In 2016, Pat McCrory was unseated by Roy Cooper. It was very close, but Roy Cooper became a very popular governor, and he won by 4.5% in a year where Democrats otherwise didn't really do that well in North Carolina, or they underperformed expectations at least. So Democrats tend to do well here, at least in governor's races, maybe not in the Senate races or in the presidential races, but locally Democrats can, win North Carolina. And in 2024, it's going to be Josh Stein versus Mark Robinson. Now, Josh Stein is the former Attorney General of North Carolina, and he is very, I would say, a very strong candidate. He's kind of like a Josh Shapiro type candidate where, not super well known until he started outperforming. Josh Shapiro in 2016 won on the same ballot that Trump did, so he was able to get Trump voters to back him. And then in 2020, he outperformed Biden by a pretty good amount. I think he won by 5% statewide against his Republican opponent in the Pennsylvania Attorney General election. Again, Josh Stein has won 2 consecutive Attorney General elections where the state voted for Trump. So he's done it twice. Josh Shapiro only did it once. And, he won narrowly in 2020, but it's still pretty impressive considering North Carolina's always been a close state, always with close results, and he still won as a Democrat in a state that voted for Trump. Now, Mark Robinson has also won statewide, but the problem with him is that his statewide performances weren't fundamentally as impressive because, he was running against no-name challengers, and you could say the same thing about Josh Stein, but Josh Stein won as a Democrat in North Carolina, which inherently is impressive to me because it is a red tilting state. But Robinson, I think, has the potential to be really bad for Republicans. He's made a lot of controversial statements. He's made comments that are anti-Semitic. He's made comments that imply, for example, he doesn't want women voting. And those are very toxic issues in the year 2024, right? Like, that is, you are never going to be in a position where it is electorally favorable for you to say, yeah, I want to go back to a world in which women don't vote. And he's made a lot of, really just outlandish statements, kind of along the lines of Doug Mastriano. Now, Mastriano was a disaster for Republicans, and I think it's too early to call Robinson Mastriano, but there's definitely potential there. And Republicans are really nervous about him, and that's why if you go to the general election ratings, Cook Political Report has the lean column, and that's from like a year ago. Like, if these were more updated, I think they'd all be in the lean column. And then, look at some of the polling. It's broadly pretty good for Josh Stein. Again, Signal, which is a Republican poll, has him down by 2, but that's just so many undecided. And this is a GOP poll. He's only down by 2. And then in the nonpartisan polls, Quinnipiac has him up by 8. This survey doesn't have too many. That's a lot of undecideds. But Marist has him up by 2. Survey USA has him up by 2. And then Signal has him up by 5. But first of all, that's not good if he's only up by 2 now from the March poll. And again, this is a GOP internal. So the majority of the nonpartisan polls have Shapiro or have not Josh Shapiro have Josh Stein ahead. I'm getting my attorney general's name Josh mixed up, but North Carolina, to me, I think Trump's going to win it by 2 or 3 points next year, maybe a little less. It could be a little favorable to him, but I think Josh Stein will be the next governor of North Carolina. So the last state is New Hampshire. Now, New Hampshire, this is my hot take. I think New Hampshire, as of right now, definitely a toss-up, but I'm going to go start it out in the Republican column. And that's because from what we know right now, Kelly Ayotte is in a good position. So she's likely to be the nominee. Chuck Morse is also running, but she's likely to win the primary, and then Joyce Craig is likely to win the Democratic primary. She's the former mayor of Manchester, which is the state's largest city. So it's going to be Craig versus Ayotte, and what we know is that the polling is pretty good for Ayotte. Again, Emerson has done 2 polls here. She was up by 9 last summer. She was only up by 3 in the fall poll, and I want to get more recent polling because it's been 6 months since like November, or I think 5 months, and I would just like more polling in general. But the fact that she's up in both these polls, and the fact that she's going to have a lot of name recognition, I think really helps her. Joyce Craig is a good candidate. I wouldn't be surprised at all if I, in a few months come out and say she's favored to win this race. But right now, just on the information we have and just name recognition and the fact that New Hampshire is likely, or is we know for a fact, a state that is open to voting for Republican to the governor level while voting Democrat in presidential races like they did in 2020, with Chris Sununu winning by 30 points while Trump lost the state by like 7, which is not great for him. All of that makes me think that Ayotte can win, and just based on the polling we have right now, I would say she's favored, but it's early, and I could totally see myself moving this race. So, again, let me know what you think. Let me know if you disagree in any of these states. I think the closest ones are going to be New Hampshire, North Carolina, and Washington looks interesting, at least for right now. So, also tell me what you want to see next, and I'll see you all in the next video.